everybody. Welcome to the stream. A few minutes late, Boss Priest kept me with some questions and conversations, which I didn't mind really. They were good questions and conversations, but nevertheless, here I am. And we are doing a big lesson today because we're doing a lot of big things. But to begin, how's everybody doing today? Aw, thanks for the resub. Questions and conversations are all the rage, you're right. Live now. Very exciting. Hope you're having a good start of your weekend. All right. 20 months, man, that's a long time. Proud of you for sticking around, even though I am inconsistent at best. One day, I'll be as consistent, if not as frequent, a streamer as my husband. For now, Fridays, I can do it. All right. Latin. So recently we did all the subjunctives, which was extremely exciting. Fridays are on the calendar. Exactly. It's working. The thing is working. So that's obviously quite good. We like it when things are working. All right. So if we recall, subjunctives mean that either the verb that is in the subjunctive is in some sort of secondary clause. What we've been seeing a couple times are purpose or indirect command. So we have our main verb, Caesar sent the men, and then our subjunctive in order to blah, 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 blah. So generally with an infinitive or some other phrase in English, but a subjunctive in Latin. We'll also see them getting used in a couple independent uses, I imagine, at some point, but I don't know when. Because now we're taking a break from subjunctives. We are talking about the participles, which are even more important than subjunctive. I would dare say participles are one of the most important things in Latin, because Latin loves its participles. What is a participle? A participle is a verbal adjective. So it's verbal. It is formed from a verb stem. It has actioniness to it. It can take objects depending on, what you want to say with it. But it's like an adjective because it modifies a noun, gives more information about a noun. It matches the noun that it's modifying in gender, number, and case. It's a sippy wearing a fancy hat? Is that what a participle is? Sipple. A participle. I get it now. That's a good joke. And because they're like adjectives and they modify the nouns, or they match the nouns they modify in gender, number, and case, that means they have endings and follow either the first and second adjective endings of us, or the third declension adjective endings, blank is em, e, blah, 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 blah. There are a total of 4 participles. I'm not going to continue that statement until I see what we're doing here. But it does look like we're laying out 4 participles, so should be safe in saying that. So there are 2 active participles and 2 passive participles. Because they're verbal, therefore they have voice, active or passive. They also have tense, present, perfect, or future. Just present, perfect, or future. Those are the only tense markers for the participles. It'd be way too complicated to do the other things as participles. So here are what they all look like across the board: first, second, third IO, and fourth conjugations, following the same basic pattern. So present active, you take the stem, ama, monet, rege, capie, audie, and then add the ns. And that gives us the masculine, feminine, and neuter, singular, nominative participle. Amans, the loving man. In the genitive, it is amantis. Amantis. So the ns becomes an ntis, and that gives us our genitive form across the board. Because the genitive is an is, we know it is third declension, blank is em, or blank a, and so forth. And that is how you conjugate the participle. Nothing too tricky. And it is translated in English as blanking, verbing, loving, advising, ruling, taking, hearing. Something that you're presently actively doing. Yeah, and we'll get back to the time in a moment. Future, active. So if you're about to do something, what you do is you take the fourth principal part, amatus, and instead of tus, you put in a urus. And that is, in fact, where we get the word future. It is the future active participle of to be. Some esse fui futurus. It being an irregular verb, you just get the future active participle as the fourth principal part because there is no passive of to be, so you couldn't have the passive participle. But you can have futurus. It ends with the us, so we take the first and second declension adjective endings, us, so amaturas, monituras, recturas, capturas, audituras, for about to hear. So I about to take the book, about to take the book, captura librum. About to take the book, I move my arm, moveo brachiam. But I would say captura because I'm a lady. Yeah, the word future. It's a good way to remember what the future active participle looks like. What could it be? Futuras. Ah, yes. Good. It's nice when Latin makes sense. All right, and those are the two active participles. Then there are the two passive participles, which includes the perfect passive participle, which is the most important of all the participles. It is the definite most common. And it is the fourth principal part. So if you learn all the principal parts for your verb, presuming that it is a regular verb and doesn't have something weird going on, the fourth principal part is the perfect passive participle. If there is something weird with the fourth principal part, like sum esse fui futurus, to be, and futurus is the future active participle, about to be, then it doesn't have a perfect passive participle and you move on with your life. All right. Amatus, monitus, rectus, captus, auditus. Again, that us ending. So it declines like a first, second declension adjective. Having been loved. Amata. Amatus, if you're a dude. Having been loved and lost is not how the quote goes, but it's close enough. And that's how you would say that phrase. There is no perfect active participle in Latin, so you can't actually say having loved and lost, because that would be perfect active. Sorry, we have to make it passive in Latin. Having been loved and being lost. Better to have gone and murdered everyone in fifth act than to have loved and lost. Hey, actually, that's one of those quotations I don't actually remember where it's from. So thanks for some of the background tip there. All right. And then there is a future passive participle. It gets used in constructions that we'll talk about later more than it gets used simply as a participle. But it would be about to be loved or to be loved, as it has here. The name Amanda, which is a very common name, is a future passive participle. She who is to be loved is what Amanda means. So again, or the other one that's really good to remember, agenda. The things that are to be done, from ago agere egi actum. To do. So those are good ones to remember. How do you form the future passive participle, though? This is probably the trickiest one, because you take the present stem, confusingly, ama, mone, rege, capie, audie. Then you add undus. Okay, present stem undus is the future passive participle. Again, it mostly gets used in popular phrases such as Carthago delenda est. Carthage must be destroyed. So even though it's a future passive participle, so you would think, oh, shouldn't that just mean Carthage is about to be destroyed? Yeah, probably. But instead, the future passive participle with a verb of to be gives a sense of necessity. Carthage must be destroyed. So Amanda, better translated as she must be loved. Agenda, things that must be done. So we'll learn more about that, I'm sure. It's actually a Tennyson quote. Okay. I do like Tennyson. It's been a while since I've read any Tennyson, but I remember liking him when I studied Tennyson. Yeah, right? If you're Amanda and you're never loved, that is a very sad fate. All right. So what is this note? This note has nothing to do with us. All right, the future passive participle is often called a gerundive, which we'll talk more about later. It gets used in lots of different ways that are not simple participial things. The other three, they're participles. Easy peasy. Okay. So the present active and future passive are formed from the present stem, and the future active and perfect passive are formed from the participial stem. So if you were to take a chart and have active and passive, and then present, perfect, future, you'd actually have a little bit of a X. And these two forms, the present active and the future passive, are formed from the present stem. And these two forms, the perfect passive and the future active, are formed from the perfect passive stem. That's a way to think about it. We've gone over how it's formed. So here again, how it's declined. For amans, amantis, it is a third declension adjective. Blank is ema or e. S eum ibis s ibis. So what's important here, especially with the eum in the plural and then the ia in the neuter, nominative and accusative plural, is the participles take the I stem endings. participles look like I stems. So you have a lot more I's. And even that ablative singular, it is more common to have the I, but sometimes you still have the E. And as the note says, when it's used more like an adjective, it takes the I ending, amanti. When it's used more like a verb, it takes that E ending, amante. No, I don't think that's what the grammatical family tree is, although I guess when I'm making X's, it does look like there's some crossing going on. This is how the future active is formed. Future passive, we'll talk more about later. Participles agree with nouns or pronouns, just like adjectives. All right, so the final note here is participles of deponent verbs. We briefly met deponent verbs at the end of part 2. So deponent verbs are a set of irregular verbs that have passive forms but active meanings. So even though it looks like it's passive, you still translate it as active. That means the principal parts look a little bit different because they'll give you all passive forms. So you have to do a little bit of backwards building to get the participial forms. Because you do have all the participial forms. It's just it's a weird verb. So present active, for example, hortor, hortari, hortatusum, to urge. They all look passive. It's a passive deponent verb that is active in meaning. But the present active infinitive is hortans, so the same pattern. This is where things kind of break down but it's an active form, and deponents don't have active forms. They do in the participles. Future active, hortaturas, again, normal looking active infinitive. Perfect passive, hortatus, is translated actively. This is the one time that you can have an active perfect in meaning. It just looks passive. But since it's a deponent, even though it looks passive, it's translated as active. So hortatus is having urged. Thanks, deponent verbs. Thanks. So now you have both active forms and passive forms, but they're all active, except the gerundive, the future passive, which is passive in form and passive in meaning, to be urged. Good job, Latin. Good job, deponents. This makes total sense. So for deponents, which are in the indicative and subjunctive, they have passive forms but active meanings. With participles, you form all the 4 participles. The active ones are translated actively. The passive ones in the perfect are translated actively, but in the future passive, they're translated passively. So those are the fun exceptions of deponent verbs. Good. Right, the perfect participle of deponent verbs is passive in form but active in meaning. No other verbs have a perfect active participle. On the other hand, the future passive participle of deponent verbs is passive in meaning, as in other verbs. Super. That's really confusing. It's really weird. Just make sure you learn which verbs are deponents. Knowing those principal parts is... You can't put really anything above that. Well, you probably can, but there are a few things to put above that in Latin. All right. So here's a note just on tenses of participle. So again, we mentioned that it's a present, it's a perfect, and it's a I think my cat was kicked out of the house but is somehow back in the house. Worries me somewhat. Whatever. I'm sure it's fine. And a future. Now, oh, it makes sense now. Punch is home. That's why my cat is back in the house. The participle tense, present, perfect, or future. Oh, you might see Punch if you look closely out of the side of the camera. Do you need me to turn off the camera? Oh, there he is. There's my cat. Just floating alongside me. Roz says, hi, Punch and Kitten. All right. So, the tense of the participle, present, perfect, and future, is relative to the main verb. So what does that mean? So the present active participle, which corresponds to the English present participle blanking, can only be used of an action occurring at the same time as the main verb. So, milites insequentes ceperant multos. The soldiers pursuing captured many. Right? They are pursuing at the same time that they are capturing. The capturing happened in the past. So, the pursuing happened in the past. But since it's the same time as the capturing, it is a present participle. This is mostly important for when you want to be fancy with translating, which at some times will be necessary. So, for example, it would be valid to say, the soldiers pursued and captured many. It's valid to say that. It's better to say it this way. It's not a complicated enough sentence to warrant breaking it down. But Latin uses participles as main verbs a lot in very long, complex sentences. So sometimes in English, when we're translating, we want to make some of those participial phrases into their own main or subordinate clauses. So it's important to be able to keep track of relative time. So the perfect participle, by extension, happens before the main verb. So it's having been heard or heard, and the future happens after the main verb. So here's some examples. Milites currentes erant defesi. The soldiers who were running, the running soldiers, were weary. Right? They are running at the same time as being tired. Caesar profecturas Romam non expectavit. Caesar, about to set out to Rome, accusative place where, did not wait. So, past tense for the main verb. So, even though the participle is future, it is still happening at some time in the past, probably. Thanks. I got a drink. All right. Opidum captum vidimus. We saw the city having been captured. Right? You can translate it that way, or you can translate like here. We saw the town which had been captured. Using had because it's a perfect participle with a past verb, so it moves it further back into the past. Imperator triduum moratus profectus est. The general having been delayed or delaying for 3 days, Set out. So here we're turning the participle phrase into a temporal clause. And this is a big thing. In English, a lot of times it sounds better to take that participial phrase and make it either a temporal clause, when this happened, causal, because this happened, concessive, although this happened, or, oh shoot, there's a fourth one. Temporal, causal, concessive. There's a fourth one that I can't think of right now. Yeah, maybe it's conditional. And generally, they put in a lot of work into their conditions, but it certainly could be. So maybe that? Anyway, so in this example, the author put it into a when sense after he had delayed 3 days set out. Because again, in English, it just sounds more natural. To me, my ear has a hard problem, has a difficult time hearing that difference because I'm so used to Latin that I'm like, the imperator, having waited 3 days, set out. Like, that doesn't bother my brain. That sounds natural. But apparently to many, it does not sound natural. Milites victi terga non verterant. The soldiers, although they were conquered, so again, turning that victi terga, or sorry, just the victi, the terga is going with the main verb. Turning that victi into a concessive clause. Did not retreat, which is what verto terga is an idiom for, to turn your back, to retreat. So the soldiers, having been beaten, did not retreat, although they were beaten, because they were beaten. That doesn't make any sense, so you probably wouldn't use that one. When they were beaten. Okay, in each of these sentences, the literal translation is given above, but the proper translation usually requires one of these subordinating conjunctions: when, since, after, though. Or a relative clause. Yeah, you can do that too. Maybe that's what the fourth one is then. The soldiers who were conquered did not retreat. Also okay. Consider in each case what translation will best bring out the thought, and do not, as a rule, translate the participle literally. Or do. I'm not your dad. All right. Questions. So that's the form and basic uses of the conditionals. We haven't done conditionals yet, of the participles. So hopefully that's more or less clear. We're going to start learning some real important things with participles soon, the ablative absolute in the next section, but I think that was enough on participles for the day. But let's just do a couple more example sentences and then I will get dinner, because I'm kind of hungry. So, puer timens ne capiatur fuget. This is a real sentence here, because we have 3 verbal units in this 5-word sentence. 5 words, 3 verbs. That's a good Latin sentence. So our main verb is fuget, and our subject is puer. So the boy fled. Good. All right. Good so far. Fuyo forgere fugi. I want to say that this might actually be present, but I cannot remember if the present or the perfect has a long U. But the subjunctive is present, so this must be present tense. The boy flees. Okay, main sentence. Temens, that's our present active participle. Fearing. All right. Because it's a verb of fearing, it can introduce a fear clause. Or, as the book referred to it last time, a subjunctive clause of purpose, I believe, is what they called it. Or maybe, no, that was the indirect command. I think they did refer to a fear clause as a fear clause. In any case, I'm calling it a fear clause. So it's a fear clause with a ne, which you translate as lest. And then we have a present subjunctive because we're in the primary tense with our main verb. So we use a primary subjunctive, present, lest he be captured. So the boy flees fearing lest he be captured. Other ways that you can translate it, because he is afraid lest he be captured, the boy flees. Okay? Since he is afraid lest he be captured, the boy flees. So any of those things are. The boy fled capture. That's a little too economical for a translation. All right. Let's see if we got another good one. Number 5, I think. Number 5 is another one of these very complex sentences, so let's do that one. Imperator hortatus equites ut fortiter pugnarent signum proilio dedit. Again, we have 3 verbal things in this sentence, and a lot more direct objects. So our main verb is imperator. Hortatus is a participle. So it's setting up a participial clause with equites all the way through pugnarent as its object. So that participle is taking 4 words as its object. That indirect command or substantive clause of purpose. Flee does imply fear. You're not wrong. And then signum proilio dedit. Dedit is our main verb. Signum and proilio are the direct and dative of reference? Dative of purpose? Well, we'll translate it and it'll be fine. So, main clause, the general imperator, whatever you want to call it, he gave the sign for battle, dedit signum proilio. That's why I didn't really know how to define proilio here. Dative. It's the dative of dative. So he gave the sign for battle, the dative of battle. Urging, hortatus, present subjunctive happening at the same time as the giving the sign in the past. Right now we're going to translate it literally. Giving, or sorry, I just said it was present. It is a perfect participle. Hortatus. This is a deponent verb, so it is passive in form, active in meaning. Having urged his cavalry to fight strongly. Ut fortiter pugnaret. he gave the sign for battle, which makes sense. You would want to rouse the troops before you go into battle. You don't want to say go into battle and then try to get everybody on board. That would be the opposite of what you want to do as a military leader, I would say. So, other ways that you can translate it: after he had roused the cavalry to fight strongly, or so that they would fight bravely, the general gave the sign for battle. You have a lot of flexibility as long as you get the sequence of events right, which I almost did not. And you know what each of the 3 verbal units are doing. It can definitely be tricky, but we did it. So I'll upload this to YouTube along with the others, and then eventually get them all backlogged onto Twitch. I've been a little bit more slow about that because I have to download it and then upload it, and a lot of times when I'm thinking about it, Punch is streaming, and I don't want to mess up his stream by having the upload go. That is a whole thing, but it's fine. Next time, we will talk about the irregular verbs wolo, nolo, and malo, which are fun ones. They're really nice irregular verbs. And by nice, I mean they're fun. And then the ablative absolute, which is everybody's favorite, or at least it's Caesar's favorite. And this textbook is gearing us up to read Caesar, so extremely important. Thank you all for watching. I hope you have a lovely day and a good weekend, and I'll see you next Friday with Wolo, Nolo, and Malo. Exactly. They're very friendly for irregular verbs, mostly just because they're fun to use. Hi, good night.